Do ut des is a new Latin phrase from the pagan folk of that country, which loosely translates to I give so that you may give. And for me, this phrase has been so crucial in helping me move my head out of the naturally transactional state of the world that we live in into one of reciprocity, especially when working with allies, right? Non-human allies, the plant spirits, animals, ancestors, deities, and other humans as well. In its original form, Do ut des was actually, and is actually, a communicative contract, right? So this is one of the coolest things about this statement, and it's why I use it in my ritual practice so much. So the contractual part of it is that we're saying, I give so that you may give, in a way that locks that cycle of sacred reciprocity in. You know, it basically says, I'm giving you something in this moment, and I'm doing it in a way that allows for you to give something in return. I'm clearing a space out within myself, within my life, that can only be filled by the particular blessings that I seek from you. The other side of this is the meditation on reciprocity. Do ut des says, I give so that you may give, not I give so that you will give, right? It's not transactional. It's not coercive. It's not manipulative. It's not domineering. It's not blackmaily, right? This phrase is concealing a deep amount of mystery around ritual and offerings, and why sacred reciprocity is the foundation of all animism. It's the foundation of all sorcery. It's the foundation of all spiritual practices that seek to cross the hedge or to move through the veil that separates the worlds that run concurrent to one another. So that's what I want to talk about today. The important difference between reciprocity and transaction. So most of us in the Western world, not everyone, but a lot of us, probably most of us, are familiar with the gifting and receiving cycle as being transactional, right? I will give you X amount of money, and in exchange, you have to give me the thing that I want. I will do this thing for you, which seems like a selfless giving act, but really it's so that I can butter you up to get a favor from you later, right? Everything is based on transaction, giving something in order to get something. This is subtle. The nuances are very, very small, but they're there. One of the big things that we have to meditate on is the sentiment, the mood of giving, right? That when something is transactional, on the surface, it can look like Do ut des, for sure. It can look like reciprocity on the surface. But it's the sentiment of the giver and maybe even the receiver that changes things. Because with transactional giving and receiving, the power is in the giving, right? It's in the thing being given and the perceived value of that thing and what is in it for me, right? We say we FM, what's in it for me? With reciprocity, though, the mood changes, and it's actually all about moving something of value, right? Whether it's a physical thing, your time, your energy, your attention, whatever, from your world, whether it's from inside of yourself, like offering the breath or poetry or song, or from your world of provisions, making a physical offering that you were able to procure based on hours you worked at your job, or, however all of that went, or something you crafted by your own hands, always a good thing. Moving that from our world into someone else's world, moving it across the boundary that separates us from other. And in so doing, some mysterious things happen. You will not hear very many people talk about this, but it's so very important. It's something that in the past I really reserved for my in-person apprentices, but Let's get into it because it's so misunderstood. So the first thing is that when we give with do'ut des, when we give with this sentiment of, I'm giving something to you that's meaningful, that I feel like you'll like, that I feel like honors you, that I feel like has value for you as a person, it changes the energy of things, right? It's less about what am I going to get in return and more about how can I get you to accept this and be happy? Like, how can I find something that will make you happy? And that's great. That's like the top level. As we go deeper, we find that in giving in this way, it creates a space within us, right? That has to be filled. Nature abhors a vacuum, okay? So when we give offerings like this, transactional offerings don't do the same. If I take $10 out of my wallet and give it to you to coerce you to do something for me, there is not a forceful desire in the universe to quickly rush in and replace the space that $10 took up, right? No one cares, right? We just don't experience that way. But when we give in reciprocity with this different, slightly different mood, very nuanced, we do create a space within us. And it's like the whole world conspires to try to fill it back up. You know, it's like if you emptied a space out and expected it not to fill up with air, or you took a handful of dirt out from a body of water and expected water not to rush in to fill that space. That's the energy, right? Everything full, everything utilized, always giving. And so when we give in reciprocity, when we give of the deepest part of ourselves, regardless of what kind of gift it's coming from our spirit, right? That's where it's rooted. We create a space where the person who we're giving to has this ability and this impetus, and if we look at the old Indo-European pagan traditions, a responsibility because of do'ut des, that communicative contract, to respond in kind. We create a space where the thing we're asking for can actually be given. This is the second of three mysteries. The third one is a real banger, so stick around for that. So how often do we ask for something, or do we want something, or do we, think we want something, and it can't happen because we're actually not willing to receive it? There actually isn't any room for it to happen. We're so stuck in our ways. We're so carved into a particular pattern, behavior, or belief that even though, some part of us, the higher part of us, right, is asking for the thing to come in, when it comes in, there's nowhere for it to go. Everything is already full. We're already filled up with our old stuff. Do'ut des begins with an emptying of the self to create a specifically shaped space for the response of the ally we're working with to fill. So do'ut des, I give so that you may give. I give of my deepest self so that you may do the thing you're going to do in response. And when you do that, you will create a space within yourself that allows me to then reciprocate to you, which allows you to reciprocate to me. And there we enter into a cycle of sacred reciprocity. Ideally, it never stops. Sometimes it slows down, sometimes it pauses, sometimes it's very robust and abundant. It goes through phases, but it's always happening. And this is one of the things that differentiates our ally and familiar relationships, the patron relationships we have with different deities, with different plants, different ancestors, from our other more casual relationships. I can love every plant, but the ones that I'm very close with are the ones where this cycle of reciprocity is active, right? That's actually the thing that makes the difference. There's a 2.5 2A mystery, right? We'll say a 2.5 level mystery. The third one is that when we give, especially to our non-human allies, to the plant spirits, to ancestors, to heroes, to deities, gods and goddesses, spirits of place, when we do'ut des, I give so that you may give, our offering passes through the hedge or the boundary or the veil, however you want to conceptualize it, because it's imaginal, right? To the other world. In order for it to get from where we are right now to the paradigm, the perspective of where our allies are, they're here, right? But we sort of run parallel to them. So when we hand the offering over, regardless of what kind of offering it is, it has to cross through that boundary to get there. And what happens in that crossing through? It creates an opening. It creates space. It creates permeability, right? The membrane starts to thin or become perforated. That makes sense, okay? That if we want to hand something from our world to the other world, that there has to be some permeability, right? And that permeability happens through our sentiment, through our ritual actions, through the offerings that we choose, through the sacred spaces where we place those offerings, through any petitions or prayers or charms we use to ask the ally to accept the offering, because we see this classically in old paganism, right? That more often than not, the simple prayer that goes along with the offering is just that it will be accepted. Not that you'll accept it so I can get something, but that it will be accepted so that we can become kin, so that we can become friends with each other, right? That's the sentiment. That's the difference between transactional and reciprocity. So in this giving of gifts and then receiving of the reciprocal gift and a giving again and the receiving again, we sure are crossing through that boundary over and over and over and over again. And what ends up happening is we end up carving a line. We've all been in a field, a meadow, a forest, where you see a very thin path carved through the density of it all that animals are using to get to one place or another. And they're walking back and forth, maybe every day, maybe seasonally, maybe it's a bunch of different animals that use it enough that it actually carves a little line in the land, right? This is what we're doing. We are carving a line between us and our ally that moves through the hedge more efficiently. So the more we invest and the more we receive openly, the more carved in and deep and established that path gets, and the more effortless our work with that ally gets. Everything compounds in strength over time. However powerful the relationship is now, in 5 years or 10 years, it may be more quiet, it may be more subtle, but it will, that trail is sometimes an inch wide, but we say it's a mile deep, right? So this practice of do ut des then changes the sentiment of how we give and receive, creates space in us so that the transformations that we seek through our relationships with non-human persons can actually happen, right? And it opens the ways between us. I would hazard to say that the ritual of making offerings is the most powerful thing we can do to nourish and strengthen and solidify our relationships with the plant spirits that we work with. And again, anyone else too. It works with humans. We see throughout Western and Northern European traditions that this gifting cycle was crucial to different groups of people getting on with each other. That when two different groups were in sacred reciprocity, when they acted as good guests and good hosts, when they acted as generous givers of gifts and generous receivers of gifts, then suddenly people got on well together, and there was intermarriage between the groups, and the groups maybe eventually became one big group, or they had allyships and they had each other's backs, and the resources one group had filled the needs of a lack of resources the other group had. This is how people get along, right? Is through reciprocity. So we talk about it in this sort of mystical way, but ultimately, when we apply do ut des to everything, everything gets better. The ways between us and the members of our family, our coworkers, our community, those lines get more open and more clear, and they feel better, and they're easier to traverse, right? So we can take all of this and put it into our human everyday relationships too. So do des, offerings that come from the heart, from the spirit, in a mood of love, generosity, and honor. Transaction, gifts that are done so that I'll get something, right? It's an exchange, straight across the counter, an exchange. On the surface, they might look exactly the same to the untrained eye, but to the person performing them, the mood is different, and the mood matters, right? How we show up in these spaces matters. One of the most profound things. So very quickly before we wrap up, offerings, people ask a lot, what to offer, how to offer. Offer from the heart. Offer in the same way that you buy birthday present for someone you love. You choose something that you think your ally will appreciate, right? As humans, one of the magics that we bring to the table comes from our thumbs, right? Like our ability to craft, to make, to transform. So handmade gifts, be they fresh baked bread or handcrafted mead or jewelry or written poetry or song or the playing of a musical instrument or a drawing, all of that is so valuable, right? To our non-human spirits. Something that we made comes from our world in a way that is so other to them that it takes on a deep value, in the same way that so many of the things that come from their world are so other to us that we value them because they're things we cannot do ourselves, right? This is special with the plants. Incense, food offerings, the pouring of libations, the recitation of charms and adorations, flattery, poetry always goes a long way. The making of jewelry, the kindling of a sacred fire, and tossing in of fragrant herbs to offer. There's no limit other than that what we leave in wild spaces should be ecologically supportive to that space, that we're not leaving garbage or trash or tying things around tree limbs, or even bringing in food that can rot and cause problems, right? That we're always acting as a guest. That's part of Do Des too, that we're stepping into every space, acting as guest, so that the hosts of that space can act as host. We see this in an old Indo-European reconstructed word, by the way, from the Proto-Indo-European, gosti, from which we get both our words guest and host, showing how integral these relationships are, and how many, that's why I say always stepping into spaces, acting as a guest, even your own spaces. We walk in and say, there are beings who have lived here longer than me. There are beings who have maybe lived here longer than humans have existed, right? So we always have this sentiment of guesthood and allowing for host, and that when we can play host, when we create an altar and invite the plant spirits or the deities or the ancestors to that place, we play as good a host as we're able, always making sure that the space is clean and comfortable and beautiful and well lit with candles and fragranced with incense and laid out with offerings, right? This is us having the opportunity to play host to them, letting them come in. So more sidebars than I intended, as per usual, but hopefully this helps you refine and polish your practice of making offerings and receiving blessings in return. It's very, very important. If you have questions about this, let me know in the comments below. If you want to go further into these mysteries, let me know in the comments below. I love talking about this. It's a crucial part of walking a plant spirit path and doing sorcerer's work. So we can talk about it endlessly. With that, I will send you out with blessings of peace and plenty in the spirit of Do Des. Till next time.